This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today we have, again, two returning guests, Teaching Elder Stephen O'Neill and Teaching Elder Dr. David Hall. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for being on. David, I appreciate you risking that voice after such a shortly recovered from laryngitis. But both of you have experience in women ordaining institutions. David, you were ordained by the PCUS. Is that right?
Right.
And then, Stephen, you are a graduate of Princeton Seminary.
Yes,
so
the flagship PCUSA.
Yes. Well, how has that given you insight about your experience in denominations or institutions that ordain women? How has that given you insight into our current moment in the PCA as we debate that very issue at this coming GA?
Let me start and tell you two funny stories quickly. First, I was ordained in 1980, Stephen, at the First Presbyterian Church in Rome, Georgia, about an hour north of where I am. It's EPC now. They had three women elders, very godly older widows. And I went into that with my eyes open, although I was a graduate of Covenant Seminary back in the day, and it had George Knight for New Testament and pastoral epistles. He warned me not to do that. I went against his advice, went to that church, and we led that church out of the out of the PCUS into the EPC. And the women were gracious. It was not a problem. But for me, the issue was put by Dr. Knight saliently when he said, why would you go into the EPC, which is already compromised exegetically on this issue? And as a young minister, that really meant a lot to me, but not so much that I didn't forget it in less than 2 years and accepted a call to a PCA church that was leaving the PCUS and had women elders, and didn't do my homework and didn't investigate that well enough. And my dear smart wife, who Ryan knows is much smarter than me, said, honey, we're going to a church that has women elders, aren't we? I said, oh, no. And she said, well, look at the name on the bulletin. There's this Gertrude. And I said, well, sometimes in Germany, they play with the names. And she said, how about Mary? I said, oh, yeah, I guess I didn't do my homework. But those women had gotten onto the session for one reason only, that is to help lead the church out of the PCUS, because the men didn't have enough conviction. And my wonderful wife then was put to work. And I've got Ryan. I can't have her with me, but I've got her notes in red. It's a beautiful. The Ann Hall works of art. We have beautiful red inked things, and that came from an assignment. My first year, I was asked as a newly ordained minister in the Southern Presbyterian Church to do a review of the women's literature. This would be 1981. And it was a women's study on Isaiah. So I gave the book to Ann. I said, Ann, would you read this? Just mark it up, see what's wrong. And it came back all filled with red. I ended up giving a review to the presbytery, in which my only commendation of the book was its cover seemed to be aesthetically pleasing. But I'm much older than that now. So anyway, that shaped my convictions. And while I went into ministry, telling myself I would be open-minded, the truth is, Scripture seemed to be very clear then. It is now. It hasn't changed. Most of Christ's church for, let's just say 20 centuries, a fairly long stretch of history, across all denominational lines, has come to similar exegetical opinions as the very traditional interpretation which exists in the PCA still today.
And Stephen, when you went to Princeton, I assume you had some blue-haired, butch-cut colleagues.
That was I blocked out a significant portion of those memories, but I suspect that is the case. I think some years ago I recall reading something. I think it might have been from Kevin DeYoung, and he was writing about his experience in the RCA or wherever he started, and just having a very great sensitivity to the women's issue, women's ordination, and the slide that can sort of like lead to. Because when I was at Princeton Seminary, I hear stories about some years prior of especially in the PhD program, people would get admitted and they'd be orthodox and sound and hold to the view Dr. Hall outlined about women's role in the church. And by the time I was there, and I wasn't there as a PhD student, there was an MDiv student, but there were people who on the committee for admitting PhD students would be like, so do you think women can be pastors? And if you said no, they would just, nix your application. Princeton Seminary used to be like, oh, well, we're open to many views here, to sort of narrowing that. You're only allowed to have one view. And then I have a distinct memory, one of these sort of like women's initiatives at the seminary had an activity that they invited everyone to. I didn't go. I knew some people who went, and it was called the Holy Blackout, where you took a Sharpie marker and you took a Bible and you started blacking out all of the problematic sections. And, you get to Ephesians 5, and the seminary posted this on their social media account, where you have, like wives and husbands, husbands and wives, and it was blacked out such that the text read, wives, love your, and then a lot of black, and then wives. Because that's what they wanted the scriptures to say. Wives, love your wives. And, that's a insane position to hold. But you don't get there just overnight. You get there over a long period of time of declension that starts with going soft on what the scriptures say about things that the culture wants you to conform to on.
Yeah. And as Dr. Scott Cook discussed on last week's episode, with ARP and the RPCNA, both of them, the reason that they ordained women to this day is because of compromise, social pressure and compromise, whether in the late 19th century for the RPCNA, and then in the 1970s as a compromise position with the Bardians in the ARP. So when you start to compromise on the issue of church office, it has grave consequences down the line. And we see that, I don't know if it's a full flowering or full dying at Princeton Seminary, but David Hall, you are the foremost historian in the Presbyterian Church in America. As far as I know, you're the only author who has published a comprehensive history of the first 50 years of the PCA. So how do you rate our health right now as we debate the issue of women's ordination, review and control, subscription? Where are we as a denomination?
Well, I'm in the PCA since 1983, the joining and receiving. To give you a short answer, down, and up. Down in terms of subscription, good faith subscription. Some of us always objected to. I think if there was any question, would that lead us to say the trajectory of Princeton? It certainly has and will. So I think we're less confessionally subscription. Some of my very good friends disagree, of course, and that's fine. In terms of the question of women ordination, I think there's much more latitude, so I give that a down. In terms of review of presbyterian records, I think there have been some improvement. Some people are very concerned about that. Maybe we can talk about some of the history of that particular evolution. I know Stephen is probably even more familiar with that than I am, but from a historian's point of view, there does seem at present to be a little tightening in RPR, and it could be the explanation for that could be as simple as we're bigger than we used to be, and we used to not read our records very carefully. I served on RPR, actually it was R&C, Review and Control, back in the 1987 or 88 era. So, Stephen, I don't know if you guys have talked about this on RPR, or Ryan, if you have, but it's interesting that there's a semantic fingerprint that still exists. Chapter 40 in the BCO is entitled General. What is it? Review
And control.
Which was the received language. And in the late 80s, some of our broader brothers, who I think happen to be some of the strongest founders of the PCA, thought that might be too constraining and sought to lessen it and make it a kinder, softer, gentler review of Presbyterian records. But the fingerprint still exists. Historic Presbyterianism has had that kind of control mechanism. And, people don't like, they don't even like the C word. Nobody even likes to talk about control, but we're a denomination full of control freaks. So we probably ought to just be honest about that. Teaching elders, ruling elders, the whole passel of us. So it's a part of Presbyterianism. It can be misused. I think there have been some instances when it has, but I think there's some instances where it's been very helpful too.
Well, that's helpful context. And recently, the Alliance for Mission Renewal has been publishing some material that seems to want to address the issue of women's ordination and women's roles. And those have come up through review of presbytery records, or review and control, as it maybe should be called. But this Alliance for Mission and Renewal, David, can you place them in their context? Again, you've written that history of the first 50 years. There have been all sorts of caucus groups. Where do they fit in the spectrum of the PCA?
Let me give you a short history, and forgive me, Stephen, if this is boring. This is in the book Irony in the PCA. Where I list the caucuses, the history of the caucus. The first one was Vision 2000, 1985 through 1989. Some of the founding fathers, whose names you'd know, Frank Barker, Jim Baird, Jack Williamson, were prominent leaders. And they were concerned that confessional orthodoxy might stifle church growth and missions. That was the first caucus group. And they would organize, and they would create their list of people they wanted to nominate from the floor, and all that went on in the late 80s. So then came the consensus movement in the mid-90s, led by Tim Keller, John Wood, who left the PCA, Paul Koistra. I think Brian Chappell was the early part of that. Skip Ryan was. And I would always call that the son of the Vision 2000 group. But now we're like 4 generations down the family tree. So there's Vision Caucus, and then there's the Consensus Movement, and then in the early 2000s was PPLN, Presbyterians and something, I don't know, network, Presbyterian Pastors Network, something, again, populated by almost the same people. I'm going to say identical same people, the same generic thrust to prevent the PCA from narrowing, if not to help it broaden. And then came the infamous National Partnership, the son of, great-great-grandson of one of these, which lasted for about 10 years. And it's hard for me to distinguish the AMR from its parentage. It's just, I think, the latest issue of the same kind of attempt to control the denominational machinery. Now, in fairness, those who are my friends who are involved in those groups would say, yeah, but what about GRN, and what about Greenville Seminary, and some of those aren't those caucuses? They may very well be. So I at least for one have tried to just do some work in our presbytery and stay away from those groups. They're overtly political group. They have strong ideologies. And I suppose we have to accept at some point in time in the PCA that if and when AMR ceases, yet 10 years from now, there'll be a son of AMR. But there's a real tenacious desire to control the denomination by a lot of different parties.
Right, and I'm not arguing that these caucus groups are bad. I think in some ways they're helpful. We know where people stand, and I appreciate that this alliance group they're putting things out there. They're letting people know where they stand. Well, Stephen, how would you characterize the alliance literature of late?
I mean, yeah, I don't usually, trawl the PCA blogosphere very much, but things do filter through, whether it's through, one of the PCA teaching ruling elder Facebook groups or through Twitter X. And I mean, yeah, they appear to have been foregrounding some material on just women's ordination might not be the most charitable description, but maybe like the role of women in the church. How would women serve and utilize their gifts in the church? And it's been skewing in a direction of something like being an unordained deaconess or being an ordained deacon/deaconess. And some of the arguments that have been advanced in some of their published material, just they sort of just sound like the boilerplate stuff that I would hear back when I was in seminary about, well, why it's appropriate for women not simply to be an unordained deaconess or a ordained deacon, but to be, a minister who's preaching and teaching and doing all of those things. And I'm not saying that the Alliance is advocating for any such thing. It's just that the form of the argument and the substance of the argument is often sort of hard to distinguish from those arguments I'd heard, during my seminary years. So it's about this issue. I mean, there's overtures that have been advanced by several presbyteries to do something about the deacon/deaconess issue, whether for or against. And it seems like they're entering the fray and making their convictions clear. And yeah, it's helpful that I think the denomination can see that this is what some people think, and a group of people who are public about their opinion think about this sort of topic.
Thank you, and yeah, I agree. It's good to be public. So we have this recent article, 10 overlooked biblical considerations regarding women's participation in the ministry of the church. That is a title. I tell you what, that may be a 10-word title, and then a picture of a woman with her eyes closed, I suppose, and it's written
It appears
by
to be the Virgin, I would say, probably. Looks like the Virgin.
maybe. I've never seen her, so I don't know what she looked
Yeah,
like. But
I'm not familiar with
maybe,
Protestant depictions of the Virgin in art, but
yeah,
it looks sort of like what she would look like.
yeah, some nice Norwegian virgin there, blonde hair. If her eyes were open, I presume her eyes would be blue.
That's a veil,
Um,
Ryan. Come on, that's not her hair. Come on,
is
man.
that a veil?
Yeah,
I don't
some kind of
know.
head covering.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it must be a head covering. So here's the next installment is the Alliance advocating for head coverings, and we'll get Alda Leon to to debate that with Kyle Wells, I
Hey,
suppose.
can I
Although,
go back to something Steven said? Can I go back and give him
please get us out of here, David. Please.
a big amen? Yeah, I'm trying to help. A big amen. Stephen, I had the same kind of experience when I was ordained in the Southern Presbyterian Church. I heard all those arguments, and it's a little stunning to me. I think I saw them most clearly at the time in the CRC, because the PCUS had already gone. PCUS, in the United Presbyterian Churches, you and I know, it was already far gone. But the CRC had all of those arguments out in broad daylight in the late 80s. And then lo and behold, in the PCA in the early 1980s, I started seeing the same kind of arguments. And I don't think the authors or the authorettes were aware necessarily that they were replicating these kind of arguments. And to this day, everyone is so fearful of being branded a liberal that everyone will say, we don't think women should be ordained as elders. We don't think women should be as pastors. But yet you continue to see these overtures, and I appreciate how you articulated that the argument form, and let's take the names off, take the labels off. The argument forms are nearly identical to dialectics that have gone on the last 50 years. They're not new.
Especially given the annotated resource list that is linked here, that a number of them will make the argument that women should be preachers and women should be deacons. So I don't think it's possible to separate this list of 10 overlooked considerations for the same arguments that were made in the previous article by Teaching Other Well. So let's, if it's okay, we'll skip the debate on head coverings and move right into women served alongside male priests in the temple. We've got some references to the scripture prior to the temple here, Numbers, right? There was no temple in Numbers. First Samuel, of course, references the temple, but it means the tabernacle, right? When Samuel was sleeping in the temple, it was obviously the tent. So obviously Hophni and Phinehas were doing something untoward with the women at the tabernacle. Is there significance to the women serving alongside the male priests and Levites? I mean, the Levites have been completely sidelined from this article. No one mentioned the Levites. What's the significance of this?
Well, on that first point, and this is one of those places where an article that has 10 points, but each point is 4 sentences long, it's probably going to be oversimplifying a lot of things. And I think the first one, it really is, it's beginning to look at, the charge of man to work and keep the garden, which does use priestly language, those 2 verbs there in Genesis 2 being repeated with respect to the responsibility of the priests, and Eve being the helper to Adam and those things. But I've anytime you read like a sensible commentary on Genesis, whether it be reformed or just theologically inclined, it's not going to talk about this as an argument for women's ministerial service, it's going to be an argument for, man made in the image of God and being, giving authority over the creature, having dominion over the creature, as the confession or the catechism says, and that's just what's going on here. And then, Adam had this sort of priestly role in the garden, and that's replicated with respect to the priests in the tabernacle. And that's usually the connection that's made. And frankly, this is the first time I've ever seen that drawn out as a argument for women's service in ministry.
Yeah, I think on that first point, I think sometimes, this is a very stretched article. Stephen said maybe simplified, but this is stretched to the breaking point. Language is stretched, logic is stretched, historical context is stretched. The red ink version I have for my wife says, well, show me again, where was the temple in Genesis 2? Genesis 3. So I have to take about a 10-minute discursus to give her a lesson in biblical theology and explain to her how, it's not there, but everybody thinks it is.
And if you say
So
temple one more time, G.K. Beale will appear.
Yeah, we build everything. We build everything on that. It's like it's sort of like in New Testament studies, everything's a chiasm. Well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. So I think we love the temple. We love the great biblical theology, but to take that at best, point number one should be renamed: women served alongside of males in the symbol of the temple. Okay, so I'm not sure Adam was a priest. There was no sacrifice. And I would certainly advise all of us as we use this document, and my guess is, Stephen, this is meant to be a short, as you said, listicle, short talking points document. We'll hear this a lot. I certainly hope our friends in the PCA ministry will avoid 1 Sam 2:22 in arguing that women should follow that model because Eli's sons were condemned for sleeping with the women at the entrance to the tenant meeting. So I don't think anybody wants to argue that's something we want to
I was
follow.
kind of shocked that text appeared here.
Yeah, it's sort of like you can marshal a bunch of words together and say, okay, these are the same thing. And I'm not even convinced. And Stephen, I might disagree a little bit. I'm not even convinced that Adam's description, those terms, the words, have to mean priestly function. They may mean that, but as in many other cases, we have to be careful looking at the context of the words. So I think that's probably a pretty poor argument. And again, I would hope a lot of women would get a little incensed at the calling of 1 Samuel 2 to argue for the role they want to hold.
Well, and that's a great point, David. That no one, at least that I know of, on the confessional side of the PCA, is saying women don't have a role of serving in the church. So
Right.
If that's all that point one is making, well, then it's kind of, yes, I'm going to write my senior thesis on that the sky is blue. Well, I mean, it's kind of a banal pedestrian observation. Well, yes, they did.
Well, my wife, for example, will frequently join me as we're welcoming new visitors. And I always think it's a much better representation of the church to have her with me. And of course, my wife is involved in our ministry. Of course, she, helps in many different ways. But that's not to be confused with the office. I'm going to skip ahead because I know we're going to run out of time. I just have to go crazy on one of the things that the genitive. I think it was in point 8, the genitive construction, where Phoebe is called the deacon of Concrea. I just want to say, Stephen, where do you live? Where are you?
I'm in New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey.
I don't even know anything about that, but that's like saying the Walmart of South Haven, Mississippi. It's a genitive construction. It's simply a genitive of place. It's not any kind of. It's not a more special Walmart than anything else. And there are over 24 different possibilities of genitives that we could have used. So just to reach in and pull that one out, again, to me, it's stretched. If the long history of Christianity held to that, maybe we would have more sympathy with that elasticity. But it seems to me like this is going to great efforts that I'm not sure are really going to help the cause. But I got to say this, Stephen, I like you. I am really happy for us to have this discussion, and even happier that we will have some votes on these matters. And then I would be really happy if all of us would discuss, write, speak at the microphones, take our votes, and if all of us would say, we have had our time to discuss this. Now we're going to go on about the work of the gospel ministry, and we're going to live by what our Constitution says. And if I need to go to the EPC or something like that, this is America. You could serve in any number of Presbyterian churches. You could be independent. You could be non-denominational. But the almost Herculean effort to change something, I was not asked for counsel, but I think it's a tactical mistake that the AMR will probably regret big time, because at the end of the General Assembly, after we take some votes, those guys are putting a lot on the line, and I wouldn't want to wager much money on that.
And I wonder if our study committee on Christian nationalism will help us here, because as far as I know, and as you alluded to, David, there is no Presbyterian Church of America. That we are not a nation with an established church. And so if men feel like they need to be in a communion that ordains women, and that's something their conscience requires, they're free to go. They won't lose their living. They won't lose, the state's not going to stop paying, their bills, because the state never started, I assume, I hope, here in this country. Right. So unless it's, I just don't see why there's this urge to make the PCA into something that we have every single time we've been asked this question, whether the RPCES or the PCA. The answer's been no. We don't ordain women. What about this? Especially with this Phoebe as the servant or deacon of such and such. Every time the word deacon appears in the New Testament, and it is singular, it's always about an individual, and it's not in its official sense. It's it's translated servant, but in the official sense, the plural. In the official sense, it's always plural. Does that help with the translation here? That office is only a plural function of the noun rather than singular, as in the case of Phoebe, this deacon.
Seems to me it could. Seems to me that's a good semantical argument, and the singular could either be masculine or feminine, for that matter.
Right.
But you're right. The offices are addressed using the plural. So again, I think careful study can save us a lot of headaches. And I for one wouldn't want to be campaigning on this as my particular platform.
Stephen, what about these citations? You were at one of those big fancy seminaries up north, and the ruler of the city. I think you said you were able to find some of these sources. What can you tell us about the context?
So one of the things that sort of when I was reading this article, it sort of had that like that generative AI feel to it. It sort of sounded like stuff that you read on Twitter that comes up and you're like, oh, like some chatbot invented this and you sort of passed it or something like that. And I mean, like for instance, like the First Samuel reference, where it's like, oh, I'm not sure that's the reference you want to support this argument that you're making about women at the tent and those sorts of things. And so I was like, oh, I wonder if these citations, because they seem fairly specific. They're in standard reference literature, but reference literature that at least in my experience, I'm not typically checking the Greek inscriptions when I'm doing sermon prep or teaching prep, which maybe I should, but I typically am not. And so I
maybe you should
look them up. and I found I wasn't able to find on the internet the second source, freely available, and didn't have time to go to the library. But did find the first source, and at that location, I wasn't able to find that specific Greek phrase that is translated as ruler of the city of Demetrius. And so I was confused. I asked a few friends. I was like, do you see it here? I read through the inscriptions on the relevant page, and it just simply wasn't there. So I was wondering, if this is one of those cases where you have, a phantom citation just appearing because, a tool like a generative chatbot was used to bring stuff up. I mean, in reality, it could just be, it's on a different page. I clicked
or a different version,
forward
right?
and back.
Perhaps the
Well,
version
it's a fairly standard reference work. So it's not like
Yeah.
The ESV, which has its updated version every how often, but then the permanent version and stuff like that. It's like people back in the day were finding Greek inscriptions and they started publishing them, and now it's just many volumes on a shelf. So I mean that was one of the things I was hoping would get clarified maybe by a subsequent posting of the article. Because it seemed like there was some discussion about this on social media, but I haven't seen any update on that point. If this citation,
I would just say I haven't seen any of that. It for what it's worth, it didn't feel to me to be an AI generated document. I think the author's probably very competent, but again, you don't really need to go to the Greek inscriptions or the Hebrew to read the English of these versions. I mean, there's much made of. Some women, I mean, what is it later on, Ryan? I'm sorry, we're jumping out of order, but the article says there's an intentional pairing in Luke between the apostles and the women. You don't have to be a New Testament scholar to go look those up. You look them up and you find out if you study the Gospel of Luke, lo and behold, Luke was very, very fond of women. There are 13 different women mentioned in the Gospel of Luke who are not mentioned elsewhere, but there are also children mentioned, and the children. So why don't we argue that the apostles and the children? So whether the sourcing of this, I still think people need to look up every verse in this and see if the scripture is rightly applied, because I think when you look at that, you find that it's the article is this is an enthusiastic article. This is an article that's rah-rah for having women have a broader role in the PCA. It begins with a premise which I'm not convinced of. I've never been. Stephen Ryan knows some of my family, so I have a very lovely wife who will not appear on a podcast with Ryan Beasley, so she's smarter than me. She might or might not have some pretty strong opinions. But we also have two daughters who are both healthcare professionals. They're very strong women, and we want strong women in our church. But none of the women in my family, and I will tell you of the church here, which is a sizable church, there are very few women who want to be officers. They're busy, especially young moms. So, we have a culture, I think that sometimes we have denominational leaders, and you may have seen this in some of the old denominations. I have, at least in the CRC. I think we have denominational leaders from time to time who think they know what their grandchildren want, but they're actually a little bit out of touch. And I'm not sure there's this huge push. I still lament, to use the term that everybody does today, that is it the 2016 paper, the ad interim paper on women in ministry, 2016, 2017, started with the premise that if we don't allow women to be ordained, then we must find what they can do. Well, wait a minute. Do we? I'm not allowed to be the president of the United States. Is there some commission that has to find a job for me? Of course not. We have rules. We have scriptural teachings. And I think we try to follow those. But we keep repeating those things. We keep repeating even some of our conservative heroes. I mean, Ed Clowney was the one, for Pete's sake. Ed Clowney was the one who, as far as my knowledge, first coined the phrase that an unordained woman can do anything an unordained man can. Well, no. That's a clever saying. But no, that's just not the case. So we have to, I think, faithfully teach and preach in our congregations, in our families, And I'm just not sure. I think the age of feminism is probably about maybe even past. And there's some brothers who sometimes are in leadership positions who think that our denomination is going to die if we don't liberalize a little bit in this area. And I'm just not convinced from experience or scripture that that's the case.
And with these scriptures that have been cited, as you say, David, a lot of them seem like they're kind of out of context, or they're obscure and need to be interpreted by more clear scriptures. Women praying and instructing in the assembly. Um, I find it's hard enough to get men to pray in the assembly publicly, much less to get ladies to do so, even in a prayer meeting. And I don't share B.B. Warfield's conviction on women praying in the prayer meeting. So
Well, no
yes,
one
I do
likes
want.
B.B. Warfield more than I do, but also in the PCA, no one has more quickly said that Warfield was mistaken in some areas. Warfield was mistaken, and I argue this to the General Assembly. He was mistaken in his claim that Calvin was a virtually a theistic evolutionist. Well, we love Warfield. I'm not gonna stop commending his work, but as we argued at the time, even the greatest home run hitters strike out every once in a while.
We
But
don't
that's
take our
okay,
vows to Warfield.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I do wonder how much of this is a misunderstanding of what people need and want. Why is it that there's this push that is new, that to force women to do things, to put women into positions that the church has for 1900 years seen as the role of men and or ordained men. It's I remember I remember when I was a wee, I was about this tall, but
I was gonna say you've always
much.
been that short.
But my great grandmother, she wanted to give me this thing, and it's like, well, it really didn't. It was a toy that was kind of below my years, even if I was pretty short. Uh, she didn't know what I wanted because she was, a great grandparent.
Yeah.
Likewise here, are there women clamoring at churches to I want to be able to pray, I want to be able to offer the pastoral prayer? Well, I don't think.
Well, I'll give you an Ann Hogg quote too. She says no woman really wants to be ordained as a deaconess. That's just a smokescreen. She wants to be an elder. She wants to have the power. No one really wants to be a deaconess, to make the coffee and open the doors and count the money. That's from a woman. I would probably not agree with my wife, but that's what she says. So I need to represent her fairly. But
we don't want to sideline her.
Yeah. I mean, maybe a compromise. Maybe the three of us need to do a compromise overture that says women may be social influencers without authority. Is that what we're really trying to say, that they want to be social influencers? But women already do. They do things in the church, and some women. I will say this: some women, I think, step out of line and try to grasp after authority. Guess what? So do males. and that's why the Lord, I think, gave order to the church. There's office. One more comment, then I'll stop because I want to hear more from Stephen. I think one of the most glaring mistaken confusions of this paper is that we're interpreting this within the broader context of other scriptures, and yet the clearest scriptures are totally ignored. The 1 Corinthians 14 passage where Paul says, this is our view. We have no other view in the Church of Christ. And if someone else thinks he is wise, we have another view. That was exactly on this issue. The qualifications are given very clearly. And in our order too, Ryan, you're aware of this, I'm sure Stephen is. I went back and checked. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. But I think after doing many ordination services, I think the vows that we give to deacons are identical to the vows we give to elders at their ordination or installation. I don't think there's any differentiation. There's an authority, and then when the congregation responds, the congregation promises to yield honor and obedience to them in their office. And there's no distinction made between the office of elder or deacon. I tried to figure out, I couldn't get this. I tried to get a number of deacons. What would you guys think the approximate number of deacons are in the PCA?
Oh, 7,000.
That's a good guess. If you have 1,600 churches, 2.5 deacons, small diaconate, you got 4,000 deacons. Movements like this torpedo and insult about 3,000 of those. So if you gin up a big attendance at General Assembly, don't blame me. If it's a higher number of diaconate, you could have 10,000. So 7,000 is probably an average. But you have hardworking, wonderful deacons who serve all the time. They're fully able to draft male, females, youth, older people to be diaconal assistants. So it's not like we prevent people from doing anything. The only thing that's prevented to go back, if we do want to go back to the temple in the garden, there was only one tree that was ruled out. And there's only one thing that women cannot do, according to Scripture, and that is hold ordained office.
And all ordained offices do wield authority. You're right, David. It's the same vows. And for those in our communion who believe the diaconate is not one of authority, that is just waiting tables, well, they're brothers. This is not a gospel issue, but we've taken vows to be in a denomination that believes the diaconate is an authoritative office. Any of these others that you want to point out? Stephen, I don't want to spend all of our time going through every one line by line, because a lot of them are just pedestrian observations that don't actually prove the point. I think it's a straw man.
Yeah, can I just give you one more philosophical query and one exegetical point? Both, by the way, from the red pen copy of Ann F. Hall. She's a particular fan of one of my colleagues, my colleague in ministry here, Mark Harrington, who's associate pastor, was teaching through Mark 6. And Mark Harrington, Acts chapter 6, he made a point that I've not seen in a commentary. I think this is genuinely original to this very quirky, eccentric, brilliant man. And when the needs were the greatest, when there was a division between the Hebrew-speaking and the Greek-speaking widows, when there was a golden opportunity, when probably the three of us would have made a decision, hey, let's get some estrogen on this committee. All males. When there was a golden opportunity to broaden the scope for diaconal ministry for office, the Holy Spirit did not choose to do that. Which
and they're ministering to widows.
Yeah. I mean, again, most of us would say, well, we need to have some kind of, women who understand the other widows. I mean, this is a female problem. And there were nothing but males. So, which gives rise to I think the larger philosophical question, did God not understand that in the 21st century, late 20th century, there would be people pushing on these? Did God somehow get fooled by culture? And was he a blind, narrow-minded patriarch who couldn't understand all the flowering of offices that was needed? Well, think about it. No, ask that question. The Lord, at every opportunity, instituted a type of office. He did the same in the in the Old Testament. The analogy is the Levites. I mean, the other 11 tribes were jealous. There were equally competent people in those other 11 tribes. And yet there was only one that God sent.
And the Levites were jealous of Aaron.
Yeah. So
Korah's rebellion.
God can set up his church the way he wants to, but I think it should be a troubling question to think that somehow the Scripture's not clear. And the argument that we need to see this in a broader context, I don't think we've actually missed it. I think the Scripture is actually very clear. And for some of us, experience has confirmed that. Let's hear about Stephen and RPR. Let's hear about that, though.
Just briefly on that, Dr. Hall, I think, from Mark Harrington, that's very helpful to think through. But also, I think you can maybe add to it even, which is, if the elders are the ones engaged in this service, and it's the elders doing it, they've already taken it upon themselves, and then when the need arises, they give it to a new class of officer, the deacon, or a new sort of officer, the deacon. Well, doesn't the fact that the elders are the ones engaged in this sort of ministry indicate that it's authoritative ministry? Are the elders really going to busy themselves with something that they shouldn't be busying themselves with? Right. And again, our book also has the responsibilities of the deacons falling back onto the elders if there is
Right.
no ability for there to be a diaconate. And so the shape of Act 6 suggests, I think, very clearly that the very nature of what the deacons were called to do, because the elders were just doing it, indicates that this is an act that requires authority and authoritative action of those who have office in the church.
Good point. Yeah, it's important work. Just say this: it's important work. The diaconate is a magnificent office. It's a New Testament office, by the way. We don't have an OT analog. There was alms and those kind of things, but the Lord, as the church expanded, did expand office, and then He gave it from male elders to male to male deacons, who, by the way, the racial and the ethnic lines were crossed there. So it wasn't that these were only Jewish people. So God was broadening because the church was growing. But that's something I've learned from our associate pastor that I think is just ingenious. And I'll tell you, I've read a number of commentaries on Acts in my life, and I've read a little bit on the pastoral epistles, and haven't seen that note made. And it's a beautiful analogy. It's right there for us. But again, I want to say the office of deacon is very important. And you take away the authoritative part of it, I think you're going to find that a disincentive to males to serve. Not because they're clamoring for status or prestige, but just because they would humble themselves and serve something greater than themselves. But I'm not sure the diaconate wouldn't be hurt gravely so if we start talking about it as if it's a minor league AA team or non-authoritative.
And Stephen, what if deacons? They don't. If, let's say they don't have authority, they're just simply chair movers and door openers. They don't. Every time they want to assist someone, they'd have to go ask someone who has authority. If there's no, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely true, and especially with respect to like the what you might say as the more there's some things that deacons do that are more visible and not easier per se, but very much essential. But it's not the same as someone's lost their job and they're concerned about paying rent and they're embarrassed about that and they're nervous about the future, and then a deacon or two deacons or a deacon with an elder will go over and pray with them and for them and exhort them, encourage them from the scriptures, and figure out a plan to get them some interviews and to get them some, like, that's just, and that sometimes that requires the use of hundreds, thousands of dollars from a deacon's fund. That stuff is clearly requiring some authority. How are you going to spend the church's money unless you have the authority to do so? How are you going to wisely and confidentially oftentimes disperse those sorts of things? Doing it to honor the Lord and to love the brethren. If the deacons didn't have authority, I don't know how they would do any of those important works that the Lord's called them to.
Isn't that a beautiful part too? Isn't that a beautiful point? Thank you, Stephen, for making that, because to my knowledge, elders are not allowed to disperse Mercy Ministries money. It's uniquely to the deacons. Who to care for the friendless and those, and we entrust that to our deacons, and we trust them, and that's really pretty important ministry. And again, this is a wonderful office. Let's keep it that way, and not try to make it non-authoritative or commissioned. There are plenty of places for that.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, you're on Review of Presbytery Records. At least I think you were. You have been. Maybe you still are. I hope you still are, because you always have a...
Still am. New Jersey Presbytery has decided to keep me going back.
Well, someday you'll atone for all of whatever it was you did that earned you that spot. But
volunteering when Rick Springer encouraged me to. That was my sin.
Hey, I got to give a shout out to my friend Mark Harrington too. Mark Harrington served on RPR once. And it was during COVID, and he took his wife over to the hotel by Lawrenceville. She had COVID. He said, "Kiss me, Kate, because I need to get COVID. I can't go back and finish day 3.
I remember this. I remember him not showing up. Now I know why.
True story.
Well, there's this there was this article that was published about the review process, indicating, oh my, we've doubled or tripled or quadrupled our numbers of citations. It seems like By Faith is doing a lot of, I don't know if they're listicles or just publishing raw numbers. This one at least seemed to have some narrative with it. But I think it was Matthew Foster published this. What was an email? Always fun times publishing emails from a fellow named Derek Radney. Did you receive this email? It sounds like a training and caucus group within Review of Presbytery Records. Can you tell us anything about this since you're on Review of Presbytery Records?
Yeah,
Stephen?
I mean, I don't think I received the email. I saw that it was out there and tried to see if it came in my inbox. Sometimes technology just defeats me, and this could be one of those cases where I did, but didn't.
Did you check your junk inbox though?
I did. My junk and spam, because I have both and they're different. Very confusing.
I don't understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, but typically what happens at the beginning, or a little bit before the RPR season begins, because the committee meets at the end of May, but before you meet as a committee, you have the minutes of the presbyteries divided among teams of men who are to read a certain number, usually 3 or 4, and it's usually 3 men to a team. And then they produce a sort of initial report that basically constitutes a draft of what the committee is going to put before the assembly, and then you vote on all the items and do it over the course of 2 days that go from roughly 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and then, Lord willing, not anything on the next day, but oftentimes a few hours on the next day. It's usually before that starts, the officers will send out a message saying, hey, we're doing a Zoom call to sort of just, if you want to brush up on how this works, if you're new, feel free to call in and we'll give a lay of the land for how RPR works and what a read team looks like and what the committee's actual meeting in May looks like. And when I first served on the committee some years ago, very, very, very helpful to get all of that information. And this seems to be somewhat like that, but also somewhat unlike that. This isn't from the officers. It's not sent to everyone. It's sent to some people. And the stated goal doesn't appear to be entirely just learn how RPR works so that you can effectively review the minutes and participate.
Yeah, this Derek Radney has worked with the Alliance for Mission and Renewal and such like. With I think he's interviewed Sean Lucas on some of their podcasts. So he's an Alliance figure, and it says this is a strategery session. It looks like aimed at providing maybe some wider latitude. He seems to what does it say? The greatest temptation the committee has faced historically is to become excessively restricted, which has been the trend for the past 25 years. The number of citations RPR has recommended has been especially high in the last 5 years. So is this an attempt by the Alliance or their personnel to have RPR not find exceptions of substance? How would you characterize this proposed meeting on February 24th?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is, I sort of wish, in a sense, I got the email because I was very confused by that.
So you were excluded to something that you would like to go to.
Yeah, I'm not unfamiliar with that feeling. So don't shed any tears for me.
Homecoming dance and things like that. You were having to relive that trauma.
But saying the committee was tempted in that direction suggests that maybe they've succumbed to some temptation. And well, if they're tempted towards something, if they're called to do a particular task, namely review the records of the presbyteries in accord with the Constitution, well, then suggests that maybe the committee has actually not been doing what it's supposed to do. And there are men on that committee who are far godlier than me, are wiser than me, men whom I admire greatly. And I don't see them as not doing their job. The RAO gives fairly specific instructions on what RPR is to do. And RPR is also still the only portion of the General Assembly where anyone can make any motion from the floor about anything in the report and amend it.
It's the
And
most grassroots report
yeah,
of them all, isn't it? It's the
it
only
is. And
grassroots report, truly, isn't it?
one could argue that. And my sense of the committee's work over the past several years has been that, yeah, they've been, trying to find those violations of the Constitution, because that's what they're supposed to
Apparent
do.
violations,
Yes,
right?
apparent
Because
violations.
it's not necessarily a violation. It just may appear that way, which is
Correct.
why this is such an important back and forth process, I think.
Correct.
Or am I
And so
crazy?
they've been trying to find those, and there's been always vigorous debate on the points, but the debate is always centered on, well, what is required. And oftentimes what will happen during the course of a debate is people will go back and forth, and then a learned and esteemed presbyter will stand up, open up his hardback binder of the BCO, and just read a sentence or two, and it's like, well, that's what's required. That's what we have to do. Like, the presbytery is required to do this with respect to this topic, and they didn't, and so we cite them. And again, the
Well,
citation isn't judicial. It's not, oh, you have to pay for what you've done. It appears that the Constitution has been violated in some way or another, whether it's a major, a minor, or somewhere in between, and you therefore should respond to the assembly. And oftentimes, every year we review not only the minutes but also the responses, and more often than not, in the response, the presbytery is like, oh, we're sorry, we misrecorded something. In fact, we did it the right way. Or, oh, we're sorry, we did make a mistake. We've rectified our mistake. Thank you. Very, very, very rarely do you get to a place where the presbytery and the General Assembly, because the General Assembly is the one who approves RPR's recommendations, they're only recommendations coming from the committee. Very rarely do you get like an actual disagreement after one round of back and forth. So I would want to know, in what ways has the committee gone beyond what they've been charged with? How have they gone beyond what the Constitution of the PCA requires presbyteries to do? I've yet to see it.
well, and there was
These,
some of that argumentation on the floor last year in Chattanooga. There was one brother who I think wanted to debate, was this something like 20 specific findings of an exception? And every single one, the assembly sided with the committee over this brother. And I think there were some hopes that that the brother might take a hint, but alas, after about an hour and a half, that hint was still not taken.
yeah. Well, I think that's the thing. It's like, if the committee made a recommendation that was just obviously beyond the Constitution, I mean, the PCA, is American. The PCA is the PCA. We like to do things our way. We don't typically like to be told what to do. We like to often tell others what to do. And so if someone's not required to do something, and that is what the report is recommending, I would be very surprised if the General Assembly simply just sort of went along with it. That doesn't strike me as how we operate. I don't think the committee erred. One of the only ways you could read this, assertion about the committee being tempted is that, well, the Constitution actually provides much wider latitude in how it can be interpreted, and along with the rules of assembly operation. And there's a more strict reading of the Constitution, and a more strict reading of the REO, and a less strict reading. And while some people are wanting a more strict, and some people are wanting a less strict, and this is advocating a less strict reading. But when I read the Book of Church Order and the REO, that thing is long. That thing is detailed. There's sub paragraphs. It's fairly clear in what it requires. And so I don't think there's a more or less strict version of its interpretation. There's just the plain sense. And so I really want to know, what is the problem? What is the committee doing wrong?
What is the
I just
temptation
don't see
here?
it. I don't
There's
know.
a very I don't know, a loaded word to use to describe a committee of the General Assembly tempted to do something as if it were sinful, to simply recommend the assembly ask a presbytery for clarification. Well, and it's not really an ask. I suppose it's require a presbytery to provide clarification. This appears to be a violation of the Constitution. Now, David, I know that you've been in the PCA for 42 years now, And I've seen this just in my 15 or so years in the PCA that presbyteries are taking review of session records more seriously. I remember in my previous presbytery, what review of session records used to be was the people bringing their session records that quarter would sit around a table at lunch. Everybody would look them over, and everybody would mark them as approved. At least that's what I was told. I don't know if that's what happened. That's what I was told. Well, then the clerk at the time found out that I had chaired the review of session records in Mississippi Valley, and he said, "Hey, we want to redo the way we're doing it." And we started finding a lot of exceptions of substance. And there was some difficulty with that culture shift at the presbytery level. And I think that we're maybe having the same difficulty at a General Assembly level, that RPR, Review of Presbytery Records, is being taken much more seriously than in the past. Can you shed some light on that with historical context, David?
Just a couple of data points, but first, Stephen, could you guys, regardless of your abilities with AI, it seems to me you're an officer, are you, or
Myself?
on
Oh
the
yeah,
RPR?
teaching elder.
But
I'm not an officer of
seems,
RPR. I'm just a
seems to me
committee member
the
of RPR.
officers might be asked to simply do a numerical tally of the sum total of exceptions sent back to presbyteries and compare that to the number of responses that are contested. You said the vast majority are thanked and received well, and people say thank you. That's what I see too. I think it'd be fascinating to get a quantified number of that. For example, it might well be 98%. So for what it's worth, but RPR was just always a sleepy.
Very briefly on that, if I may. One of the officers, Thomas Ricard, is amazing at interpreting RPR statistics. He's, I think, the secretary presently and used to be the assistant secretary, but he has just like spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of exceptions and responses over years. And on his Substack, I'm sorry for plugging other media on your podcast, Brian, but
we love having Thomas on. We probably should have for this episode.
He's gone into some much greater detail based off of that By Faith article, explaining why it is the case that things appear to have ticked up. Very, very helpful for me.
I would just find it interesting to find what percentage of your citations are welcomed and concurred with by the lower courts. Maybe you could ask him to do that. But Review and Control, or RPR, was just a sleepy little committee. Nobody ever wanted to do it. You really were in the doghouse if you got put on it. When I started back in the 80s, maybe 1/3 of presbyteries were represented. Now there's a higher representation. But I don't think RPR came to its moments in the sun until the early 2000s during the federal vision crisis. I think RPR began to be used as a vehicle attempting to support orthodoxy or to say that it didn't need to be supported. So I think you look at the rise of cases, I think you'll find early 2004, 5, 6, just before we adopted the statement on FV, that there was an attempt to make RPR not great again, but great for the first time. And then it sort of fell back into its sleepy routine. And then in the 2014, 2015, I know our Presbyterian, Calvary Presbytery were both cited because we said a man should not be granted liberty to teach his exceptions. And both Calvary Presbytery was cited and Northwest Georgia Presbytery was cited. And Dan Dodge did just a master class presentation, presented a minority report, and the Assembly upheld it. And the Assembly upheld the right of those presbyteries to hold their own views with integrity. And then things calmed down again. But as I see it, I think there's this sort of cage match struggle between the left wing and the right wing to get all their people on RPR and to get their people on nominating committee and to get their people on overtures committee and just sort of control the levers of the flow of recommendations. So RPR, the personnel who serve on that are really important. It's important to have people who are well-intentioned, who simply want to uphold the Constitution, and who will also say this goes too far. There are some times to say, come on, this is going too far.
On that point, Dr. Hall, I think it's worth mentioning that, I was quite discouraged by the email because one of the great strengths of RPR that I've enjoyed over the past several years is a real lack of party spirit on it. People just seem to really want, by and large, to interpret and apply the Constitution correctly and fairly, such that Northwest Georgia Presbytery had some matters that came out of RPR a few years ago, and Northwest Georgia Presbytery, their overtures are usually on the opposite end of the spectrum that they send up to the GA than, for example, Metro New York Presbytery. But the committee gave recommendations about Northwest Georgia, about Metro New York. The same men who were assigned by the committee to sort of handle those matters before the SJC were dealing with both cases. And so if you wanted to say, well, there's an ideological spectrum in the PCA, on one side Northwest Georgia, on one side Metro New York, well, the same men were engaged in both of those cases. There's no partisanship in that. There's just a desire to gain clarity and understanding and make sure that the book is being followed. And I'm hopeful that that remains the case in RPR. It's a hard committee to serve on. It's a technical committee, a great place to learn, great place for fellowship and camaraderie, but I would just hate to see it become some vehicle for political operation. That'd be great tragedy.
How do you think these strategy sessions, or maybe just one strategy session, will affect the culture of review of Presbyterian records? I remember meeting with a man in my presbytery. I'm sorry, I'm going long here, but he and I, we probably don't see eye to eye on many things in the PCA. I mean, we're both 90% of other issues, yeah, but in the PCA we have some differences. And he had served as clerk of the presbytery, he had served on RPR, and he said, there's a huge change that happened. RPR used to meet during General Assembly, and we'd have the first morning session, and we'd get along, and then we'd all go to lunch, and we'd go to our different caucus groups at lunch, and then we'd come back after lunch and we would fight it out. And he said that changed when RPR met before General Assembly. Then it was, we're in this together. Do you think this might be what Mr. Radney and I don't know if the Alliance is behind this. I know he's one of their prominent voices, but is this trying to return us to that politicized review of Presbyterian records with strategery sessions, with some people getting invited to groups and not others?
I don't know. Again, this is why I wish I got the invite. I could get a sense of what was going on in this meeting, to get an understanding of what the purpose is. I think the officers of RPR have done a phenomenal job trying to make sure that the committee's in it together. There's prayers before each session of the committee. There's shared meals that we have at the PCA office building. We sing psalms and hymns together at various points in time throughout the meetings, and at night people hang out on the patio. There's bottles of bourbon and cigars and conversation, and it's just a really, really wonderful time. You meet people who you don't agree with about denominational controversy, but hey, you were in the trenches with them, and they become your friends. It's again really, really wonderful. And it'd be really sorrowful if that stopped being the case.
Indeed. Well, I hope that this doesn't ruin the camaraderie that seems like is shared in review of Presbyterian records. And as we close, any parting thoughts, parting shots? Maybe David, you're up for retirement. And any you want to tell Terry Johnson how you feel about him canceling the Reformation Worship Conference? Just this is your time.
Terry's a sensitive soul, and he's grieving, so I'll leave him alone. I will just say that and Ryan, you know some of my staff members and former staff members, I wanted to see an overture that's almost identical to the one I think for Pacific Presbytery. I mean, the Metro Atlanta one just is like, cafeteria thing, smorgasbord. Everybody chooses what you want. But I think Pacific Presbytery specifically says we want women to be ordained as deacons. I wanted to propose that 7, 8, or 10 years ago. And our presbytery would have voted it down, but have our session go ahead and forward it anyway, just to get a vote on it. Because I'm going to be most shocked that, to be honest, either side could get 2/3 of the presbyteries to agree with the change on that. I'm not sure this will even make it out of the General Assembly. But I do think it could be a helpful moment if we would all approach it similar to the way Stephen just talked about RPR, looking to Christ for his leadership, looking for him to speak through his visible church. And if Christ gives an answer to the visible church that I don't particularly like, or that you don't particularly like, Presbyterianism calls us to go ahead and do our work, and sometimes we don't win every issue. So rather than a continued disturbance of the church over what was really a pretty minor issue, let's have our debates. Let's vote on it, and if I'm that out of touch, and everybody in the PCA wants to ordain women to the diaconate and to the presbyterate, okay, I'll understand that, and I'll go somewhere else. But let's have some intelligent discussions. I appreciate the author's paper as an attempt to do that. I didn't look at the reading list, but Stephen, as we said, I think I've seen them for 40 years. Maybe they're new covers, new authors, new covers, but it's really the same old arguments. And let's come together, let's vote on these things, and then let's move on with the mission and ministry of the church. And they're much more pressing issues, and we need to have some perspective on that. We need to have some resolution, it seems to me, on this. However, that being said, I'll be really surprised if people leave it alone.
Yeah. Well, David Hall, Stephen O'Neill, thank you for your time today and your insights and your fellowship.
Thank you, Ryan. It's nice to meet you, Stephen.
Nice to meet you too, Dr. Hall.
Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.